I never imagined betrayal could be disguised as a simple pen stroke. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, cutting across the dining table in sharp golden stripes. I remember the faint, bitter smell of coffee clinging to the air. That's when Daniel slid the paper in front of me. "Dad, can you sign this real quick?" His tone was casual, too casual. I didn't even look at the document at first. I'd been conditioned over the years to trust him. He was my son. My only son. "What's it for?" I asked, reaching for my glasses. "Just, routine stuff." He shifted in his chair, forcing a smile. "Some work thing I need a parent's signature on." "Don't worry, it's nothing." I caught the smallest flicker in his expression. His jaw tightened, then relaxed, like he was reining something in. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Routine stuff?" I repeated, scanning his face more than the paper. "Yeah." He tapped the table with his index finger, fast and rhythmic, betraying his nerves. "Come on, Dad. I'm kind of in a rush." The tapping stopped the moment my eyes lingered on his hand. He tucked it under the table and leaned back, adopting that laid-back posture he thought fooled me. But there was a stiffness to it, like a mannequin trying to look natural. I sighed, sliding the paper closer. The edges were crisp. I could feel the cool texture under my fingertips. But instead of reading, I picked up the pen. My trust in him was as automatic as breathing. For years, Daniel had been the quiet one, the obedient one. I told myself I had no reason to doubt him. "You're sure it's nothing important?" His smile widened, but his eyes flicked away for just a second, toward the window, away from me. "Positive. Just sign it." I hesitated. The silence between us thickened, like the air was holding its breath. Something pressed on my chest, a heaviness I couldn't explain. Still, I scribbled my name at the bottom. The scratching of the pen sounded louder than it should have, echoing in my ears. "There." I pushed the paper back. "Happy?" Daniel's shoulders dropped an inch, almost like he'd been holding tension and finally released it. "Yeah. Thanks, Dad." He folded the document quickly, too quickly, and slipped it into his backpack before I could second-guess myself. "What's the rush?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "No rush. Just deadlines." He stood up, brushing invisible dust off his jeans. "Anyway, I gotta head out. Dinner's at 7. I reminded him, but he was already moving toward the door. Yeah? I'll be back," he said, his voice trailing behind him. The door clicked shut. The house felt suddenly bigger, emptier. I sat there staring at the place where the paper had been, the faint coffee scent mixing with the sour taste rising in my throat. Why hadn't I read it? Why had I trusted so blindly? That night, I replayed the moment again and again. The forced smile, the tapping finger, the way he avoided my eyes. Details I had ignored at the table now screamed at me in the dark. My bed felt cold. The silence pressed against my ears. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. He was my son, after all. But doubt had planted itself deep inside me. The next few days, Daniel acted normal, laughing at the TV, eating dinner like nothing had happened. Yet I caught him watching me sometimes, his gaze sharp, unreadable. He'd look away quickly, but the feeling lingered like a chill on the back of my neck. Once, I walked into the kitchen and found him standing at the sink, staring out the window with the signed paper in his hands. He folded it carefully, almost reverently, before stuffing it back into his bag. When he noticed me, he plastered on a smile. "Hey, Dad, want me to make you some tea?" The words were friendly, but his tone was too smooth, too polished. My stomach turned. "No, thanks," I muttered, backing away. Days passed, but the itch in my mind only grew. What had I signed? Why did he seem so different? I started noticing small things. His late-night phone calls, the way he closed his door quickly when I walked by, the smell of cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes even though he never smoked in his life. I wanted to ask him directly, to demand answers, but fear kept me silent, fear that if I pushed too hard, I'd confirm something I wasn't ready to face. On the 5th night, curiosity won. Daniel was out, and the house was silent except for the ticking of the hallway clock. My pulse matched its rhythm as I crept into his room. The air smelled faintly of cologne and stale coffee. I searched his desk, his drawers, my hands trembling. And there it was, the paper, folded neatly, as if it held a secret too important to be misplaced. I unfolded it with shaky fingers. My eyes fell on the bold letters at the top, and my hands began to shake uncontrollably. It was my obituary, written by my own son. The words hit me like a punch to the chest the moment I unfolded that folded piece of paper. pulled from the back of Daniel's desk drawer. My throat went dry. The air around me felt suddenly stale, heavy, as if the walls themselves were pressing closer. I stared down at the page. The paper was thick, almost official, yellowed at the edges from being hidden too long. The faint scent of old ink mixed with dust crept into my nose, making me nauseous. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe some dark creative writing assignment. But then I saw the bold headline, my full name, and underneath, my birth date. And below that, my supposed death date. Beloved father, the eulogy began. A man who lived with honor, respected by his community, but who struggled silently until the end. My chest tightened. The words swam on the page, blurring under the sting of sweat trickling down my temples. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid Daniel would hear it from across the hall. I whispered out loud, almost to test if my voice still worked. What the hell is this? The sound of my own voice startled me. The room felt wrong, too quiet, too deliberate. I looked at Daniel's desk again, the one place he'd always been protective of. I thought of all those times he snapped at me for touching his things, his quick defensive tone, his forced little smirk when I joked about him hiding secrets. I thought I was being playful. Now I wasn't so sure. I kept reading, even though my body screamed for me to put the damned thing away. Survived by his loving son Daniel. I froze. My hands trembled. It was written in his neat, careful handwriting, the same precise, controlled script he used for school reports. Except this wasn't a report. This was my funeral. I swallowed hard and whispered again. Why would you write this, Daniel? The chair creaked beneath me as I leaned back, trying to pull air into my lungs. My palms were slick with sweat. Every instinct told me to confront him right then, storm into his room, wave the paper in his face, demand an explanation. But something inside me, a deep, primal voice, told me not to. Not yet. Because what if the answer terrified me even more? I folded the obituary carefully, forcing my shaking hands to be precise, and slipped it back under the bills exactly where I found it. My pulse thudded in my ears the entire time. The drawer slid shut with a soft click, but it sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I sat there for a moment, frozen, staring at nothing. My son, my own flesh and blood, had written about my death, my funeral, my life reduced to neat little lines in black ink. A sick thought slithered into my head. Maybe this wasn't just a writing exercise. Maybe this was a rehearsal. The idea made my stomach churn. I couldn't stay in that room. I got up and walked out, each step heavy and deliberate, forcing myself not to look suspicious. My body felt foreign, like I was just a guest inhabiting someone else's skin. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of my face, pale, eyes wide, a thin sheen of sweat clinging to my forehead. If Daniel saw me like this, he'd know something was wrong. I muttered under my breath, "Calm down. Just calm down." But my nerves refused. That evening, I tried to act normal. I sat across from him at dinner, pretending to scroll through my phone, sneaking glances when he wasn't looking. Daniel was quiet. Too quiet. He chewed slowly, eyes lowered to his plate, a faint twitch tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Rough day?" I asked, my voice casual but tight. He looked up at me with a quick smile. Too quick, too forced. "Just tired." His fork scraped against the plate, the sound sharp, grating. He avoided my eyes immediately after answering, focusing instead on cutting his food into neat little squares. My stomach turned again. That smile, it didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to ask about the obituary right then. I wanted to slam my fist on the table and scream, "Why did you write about me dying?" But I didn't. I swallowed the question like poison, nodding instead. We ate in silence. When dinner ended, Daniel excused himself, retreating into his room with the same mechanical politeness he always used when he wanted distance. I stayed at the table long after, staring at the empty plates, the cold food congealing on my fork. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he wrote it for a class. Maybe it was therapy. Maybe he just needed to process something. But none of those explanations silenced the memory of his handwriting spelling out my death date. Later that night, as I passed his room, I heard his voice. Low, careful, almost whispering. I stopped, pressed my ear to the door. "He won't be a problem much longer." The words shot ice through my veins. My body stiffened, and my breath caught in my throat. He was talking about me. I knew it. My son's voice didn't sound like my son's anymore. It bled through the wooden door in a low, cutting rhythm, stripped of the softness I thought I knew. I pressed my ear closer, feeling the grain of the wood rough against my skin, my breast shallow, my pulse hammering. "The arrangements are almost finished," he muttered, his voice hushed but sharp, clipped, like every syllable carried weight. "Arrangements?" I held my breath, straining to catch every word. "Timing matters. If it's too soon, people will notice. If it's too late." His voice trailed into a whisper I couldn't make out. My stomach clenched. It didn't sound like a conversation between friends or colleagues. It sounded calculated. I whispered to myself, lips barely moving. "Arrangements, timing, what the hell are you planning, Daniel?" The low hum of another voice filtered through, distorted, too faint to recognize. My son's tone shifted then, colder, almost businesslike. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He thinks I'm tired. Trust me. He won't be a problem much longer." The words slammed into me like a physical blow. He was talking about me. I staggered back from the door, nearly knocking into the wall. My heart pounded so loud I was certain he'd hear it through the floorboards. For a moment, the house seemed to tilt under my feet. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth, stifling the sound that wanted to escape, half gasp, half cry. Maybe I misheard him. Maybe he didn't mean me. But my gut told me otherwise. I leaned closer again, the wood creaking faintly under my weight. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Silence followed. Then, his voice stopped. My blood froze. Footsteps, heavy, measured, each one closer. I pulled back in panic, stumbling down the hallway, forcing my legs to move even though they felt carved from stone. My room wasn't far, just a few steps, but those steps stretched like a mile. I slipped inside and pressed my back against the door, forcing it shut with the quietest click I could manage. My chest heaved. Sweat slicked my palms, and then, his shadow passed in the hallway. A long, dark outline under the faint light leaking from the bathroom night bulb. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The shadow paused outside my door. For a heartbeat, I swore he was listening, testing, waiting. My body locked, muscles cramping, lungs screaming for air. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Finally, his footsteps started again. Slow, reluctant. Then fading away. I collapsed onto my bed, my body shaking uncontrollably. The sheets were cool against my skin at first, but soon they clung with sweat, damp and suffocating. The smell of salt, fear, and fabric softener mixed in a way that made me gag. I buried my face in the pillow, whispering to myself over and over, "This isn't real. He's not planning to hurt me. He's my son. My son." But the words felt hollow. That night stretched endlessly. Every creak of the house, every groan of the pipes, every brush of wind against the window made me flinch. I lay there wide-eyed, drenched in sweat, listening for footsteps that never came. And still, I couldn't silence his voice in my head. He won't be a problem much longer. By the time the first light of morning crept through the blinds, my body felt broken. My eyes burned from sleeplessness, and my skin itched with dried sweat. I forced myself out of bed, every muscle trembling, and moved toward the kitchen. I needed water. Something to ground me. Daniel was already there. He stood by the counter, pouring coffee into a mug, humming faintly under his breath. His back was to me, his posture relaxed, shoulders loose, as if nothing had happened. "Morning," he said without turning, his tone casual, warm. Too warm. I swallowed. "Morning." He turned then, smiling. That same quick, practiced smile I'd started to hate. His eyes didn't smile. "You look rough," he said lightly, sipping his coffee. I forced a laugh. "Didn't sleep well." He tilted his head slightly, studying me, his eyes sharp even behind the mask of concern. "Nightmares?" "Something like that." For a beat too long, we just looked at each other. His smile held. My stomach nodded. Then, as if bored, he turned away, setting the mug down. "I'll be out back for a bit," he muttered. "Got some things to do." I nodded, my throat dry, my mind screaming questions I couldn't voice. When he left through the sliding door, I waited until the silence thickened again. My curiosity overpowered my fear. Slowly I followed, peeking through the blinds. Daniel knelt in the yard, his back hunched, his hands gripping a shovel. The morning sun glinted off the metal as he dug steadily into the earth. The soil was fresh, dark, and wet. By the time I stepped outside, a patch of ground stood out against the rest, newly turned, wide enough for. My breath hitched. A freshly dug patch of earth waited in our backyard. The ground beneath my feet suddenly felt like my grave. I don't know what made me stop that morning. Maybe it was the smell, the sharp, metallic tang that cut through the usual dampness of the yard. Maybe it was the way the patch of earth stood out, darker than the rest, freshly disturbed. Either way, the moment I saw it, my stomach twisted. The patch was about 3 feet wide, the soil uneven, like someone had tried to smooth it down in a hurry. The dew clung to the grass around it, but the dirt itself looked too raw, too alive. My throat went dry. I stared at it until the silence pressed down on me like a weight, and then I heard footsteps. "Morning!" Daniel's voice floated from behind me, too casual, too light. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, steam rising into the chill air. His smile was easy, practiced. "You're up early," I managed, though my voice cracked. He followed my gaze and stopped. For a split second, I caught something, a flicker in his eyes, the smallest tightening of his jaw. Then the mask slipped back into place. He held out the coffee. "Gardening project," he said smoothly. "Thought I'd start something new. You know, clear my head." My fingers refused to take the mug. My eyes darted down. Mud clung under his fingernails, packed in deep, like he'd been clawing at the earth bare-handed. "Gardening?" I repeated, trying to sound normal, though the words scraped against my throat. "Yeah," he shrugged, sipping his own cup. "Therapeutic, right?" His tone was light, but I saw his knuckles whiten against the ceramic handle. His body swayed slightly as if restless, shifting weight from one foot to the other. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. He stepped closer, too close, his shoulder brushing mine as he looked down at the patch of soil. "Do you like it?" His voice was soft, almost affectionate, but it carried something sharp underneath, something dangerous. I forced a nod. "Looks fine." Daniel chuckled, low and quiet. "You always hated yard work." "I did," I whispered, my chest tightening. He tilted his head toward me, eyes narrowing. "But it's important to dig deep, don't you think?" The words froze me in place. Dig deep. The air seemed colder suddenly. I tried to step back, but his hand brushed my shoulder, lingering just a second too long. It wasn't a push, not really, but it was enough to remind me of his strength. Enough to remind me I couldn't ask what I desperately wanted to. Not yet. Instead, I forced myself to breathe, to steady my shaking hands. "I should go inside." He smiled again, soft, almost warm. "Of course, I'll be in soon." I walked away, each step heavier than the last, but I could feel his eyes burning into my back until I closed the door. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, felt too sharp, too loud. I couldn't stop thinking about that patch of soil, the smell, his nails, the way he stood, almost proud, almost daring me to ask, was this where he planned to bury me? The thought lodged in my skull and refused to leave. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I crept back outside. The moon hung low, silver and sickly, casting long shadows across the yard. My breath fogged in the air as I crossed to the patch. The soil was still darker, damp, uneven. My hands shook as I crouched down, my fingers brushing over the loose dirt. I scraped lightly, not wanting to dig too deep, terrified of what I might actually find. And then my hand hit something cold. I pulled back instantly, heart slamming against my ribs. For a moment, I just stared, the blood rushing in my ears. Slowly, carefully, I brushed away the dirt until it glinted in the moonlight. A small silver bracelet. Not mine. Not his. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My hand trembled as I lifted it, the metal slick with soil. A charm dangled from it, shaped like a heart. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong to me. I staggered back, the bracelet still clutched in my hand, the weight of it heavier than stone. And for the first time, I realized, whatever Daniel was hiding in that earth, it wasn't just about me. Emily's bracelet should have been buried with her, not in our backyard. The cold metal bit into my palm, harder with every heartbeat. I turned it over again and again, my fingers shaking, soil clinging to the tiny silver heart charm. My late wife's bracelet, the one I'd placed in her casket years ago, pressing it against her folded hands before the lid closed forever. So why the hell was it here, half buried in the dirt where Daniel had been digging? My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there in the yard. The night air was damp, heavy, suffocating. I clenched the bracelet tighter, so hard the edges cut into my skin. Pain was the only thing keeping me steady. The back door creaked open. "Dad?" Daniel's voice cut through the silence. He stood in the doorway, framed by the faint kitchen light. His shadow stretched long across the lawn. I shoved the bracelet into my pocket so fast it almost slipped through my fingers. My heart hammered. Did he see? You're out here late. He stepped barefoot into the grass, his tone casual, but his posture too stiff, too measured. Couldn't sleep? I needed air. I muttered, my throat dry. His eyes flicked to the patch of soil. Just for a second, but I caught it. His jaw tightened, then loosened again, his expression smoothing into something softer. Too smooth. Too controlled. You really shouldn't wander at night, he said, his voice quiet, almost gentle. Not with your heart. You never know what could happen. The words sent a chill through me. I'll be fine. He smiled then, a small curve of the lips, but it didn't touch his eyes. They darted away, to the dirt, to my hands, then back to my face. A flicker of something unspoken lingered there. Suspicion. You should get some rest, he said finally. Big day tomorrow. I'll make breakfast. His hand lingered on my shoulder for a beat too long before he turned back toward the house. I stood frozen until the door shut behind him. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. I pulled the bracelet back out, staring at it under the moonlight. My mind spiraled. Emily. My Emily. She had been buried in a different town, far from here. I had seen her casket lowered. I had watched the dirt cover her grave. I had wept until I thought my body would split in two. So why was her bracelet here? Did Daniel dig her up? The thought made bile rise in my throat. No, God, no. That wasn't possible. But then, what else explained it? I pressed the charm to my lips, fighting back tears. Memories of her laughter, her scent, the way she used to smooth her hand across my cheek, flooded me until I thought I'd drown in them. And still, the dirt clung to the bracelet. The smell of it filled my nose, raw and metallic, as though the earth itself carried secrets I wasn't meant to know. When I went back inside, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. His posture was relaxed, but his foot tapped beneath the table, rapid and uneven. A nervous tick. You okay? He asked without looking up. Fine. You seem distracted. His eyes lifted slowly, studying me. I forced a thin smile. Just tired. For a long moment, we stared at each other. His gaze was sharp, piercing, as if he could see the bracelet burning a hole in my pocket. Then, suddenly, he grinned. Well, good night, Dad. Good night. I shut my bedroom door and locked it, something I hadn't done in years. My hand trembled as I slid the bracelet beneath my pillow. Sleep didn't come. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind against the glass, made my skin crawl. Hours later, just as I thought exhaustion would finally pull me under, I heard it. A faint scrape at my door. I froze, every muscle in my body rigid. Then, soft and deliberate, something slid across the floor. I sat up, heart pounding. Moonlight spilled through the curtains, illuminating a folded piece of paper that had been pushed under the crack. I reached for it with shaking hands. The handwriting was Daniel's. I would have known it anywhere. But there was no name, no signature, only the letter. The letter wasn't just a threat, it was a confession of conspiracy. I sat on the edge of my bed, moonlight spilling across the folded paper in my hands. The edges were sharp, almost too sharp, cutting against my skin as if reminding me that every word inside carried teeth. The smell hit me first, faint smoke, like burned wood, or burned secrets. The ink shimmered slightly in the pale light, uneven strokes jagged as if the pen had been clenched too tightly, forcing each letter into the page like a wound. You never should have left us. You don't deserve what you have. Soon, everyone will see the truth. My breath caught. Us. Not me. Not Daniel. Us. The word burned like acid in my chest. My hands shook so violently the paper rattled. Daniel wasn't alone in this. And I already knew the name that fit into that shadow. Robert. My late wife's brother. Emily's brother. He'd hated me since the beginning. Said I wasn't good enough for her. Whispered venom at our wedding. Sneered through every holiday dinner. When Emily died, his hatred only festered. He'd called me a coward, accused me of failing her, of letting her slip away. He'd said things in Daniel's ear, things that made my son's gaze turn colder with every year. My skin crawled now as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just Daniel's cruelty. This was Robert's poison, resurrected from the grave of old grudges. I folded the letter, shoved it under the pillow, and forced myself to breathe. But the air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves leaned closer, listening. The floor creaked outside my door. My heart slammed. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, padding down the hallway. My pulse thundered in my throat. When morning finally came, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Hollow eyes, ashen skin, a stranger staring back. At breakfast, Daniel was already seated, sipping his coffee. His hair was neat, his shirt pressed, like nothing at all had shifted in the night. "Sleep well?" he asked, his tone warm, almost playful. But his eyes didn't blink. Not once. I studied him, the muscles in his jaw working, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth like he was holding back a smirk. "Not really," I said flatly. "That's too bad." He sipped his coffee again, his hands perfectly steady. Too steady. "You really should take better care of yourself." I clenched my fists under the table. The letter burned in my memory. The smoke, the jagged words, the threat. "Soon, everyone will see the truth." I swallowed hard. "Daniel, have you been talking to Robert?" His cup froze midway to his lips. Just for a heartbeat. But it was enough. His shoulders stiffened, his pupils narrowed. Then he laughed, short and sharp. "Robert? He's been gone a long time, Dad." "Then why?" My voice faltered. "Why would he still be haunting this house?" Daniel tilted his head, his smile returning, colder this time. "Maybe because you never buried him." "Not really. Maybe because you kept his voice alive in here." He tapped his finger against his temple, then pointed it at me. "You keep hearing ghosts." But his voice cracked on that last word. "Barely." I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. "Don't play games with me. I found the letter." Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Daniel's eyes flickered, first to the window, then back to me. His lips parted, then curved again, slower this time. "You read it?" he asked softly. "Yes." And it wasn't just you." My voice broke into a whisper. "It was Robert too." His smile widened, but his eyes stayed dead. "What makes you so sure, Dad?" "Maybe I just wanted you to think that. Maybe I wanted you to wonder if you're losing your mind." His words hit like a knife twisting into my gut. But then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, lowering his voice to a near whisper. His breath smelled faintly of coffee, but underneath it lingered something bitter, like smoke. "Or maybe," he let the pause drag, "maybe Robert was right about you all along." My blood went cold. I stared at him, trying to piece together where my son ended and Robert's influence began. His posture was relaxed now, but his fingers tapped lightly against the mug, a steady rhythm. Tap, 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 almost like a countdown. My own voice shook. "Daniel, what are you planning?" He tilted his head, studying me like a scientist might study an insect under glass. "Why are you still alive?" he asked. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into deep water. His smile told me the truth. My son wanted me gone. I froze as Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, his eyes sharp and unrecognizable. The warmth I had once known, the boy who learned to ride a bike under my guidance, the teenager who confided in me, was gone. In its place was something darker, calculating, patient, and cruel. My chest tightened so hard I could barely draw a breath. My throat felt like sandpaper. I had spent the evening replaying the events of the last few nights. The buried bracelet, the letter under my door, the freshly dug patch in the backyard. It all led here. To him. My own son, standing before me like a stranger who had studied my every weakness. Each word he muttered sliced through me with the precision of a scalpel. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, voice low, deliberate, as if savoring the fear in my eyes. What is this, Daniel?" I croaked, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles whitened. Why are you doing this?" He smiled then, a thin, cold line that didn't reach his eyes, a forced elegance to cruelty. He tapped his fingers on the countertop, slow, deliberate, almost casual, like he had all the time in the world. "You'll understand soon enough." "Understand? What?" "My own son, you—" My voice cracked. "You can't mean this. You're my son. This isn't you." He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Isn't it? Or maybe I finally stopped pretending." The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and metal, the sharp tang of blood, perhaps only in my imagination. The overhead light flickered once, casting shadows that made his face even harder to read. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, echoing in the hollow shell of the house that had once been filled with laughter. My heart pounded like a drum, each beat a warning I couldn't ignore. I noticed the subtle things, the twitch of his jaw, the slight flare of his nostrils, the way his fingers flexed and relaxed against the counter. Every movement precise, rehearsed, predatory. It was as though he had become a master of timing, of manipulation, and I was the unwitting audience to his performance. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand the truth, but fear anchored me. Part of me wondered if I had been blind all these years, if the son I raised had always been capable of this cold calculation. I recalled Emily's soft voice, her laughter that used to echo here, now replaced by silence and dread. I had to survive this, to understand, to expose, to survive. I retreated instinctively, taking a step back, my fingers brushing against the cold doorknob. The instinct to lock it, to create a barrier between us, was irresistible. My own son, my flesh and blood, was now a stranger with a sinister agenda. "Daniel, please. I don't understand. Talk to me. Why are you doing this?" His lips curled into that same cruel smile, then vanished as he shook his head slowly. "It doesn't matter what you understand. It only matters that you stay alive long enough to see it all unfold." He turned and walked away, each step deliberate, heavy, leaving an oppressive silence behind. I could hear the faint scrape of his shoes against the floor, each echo like a countdown. My hands trembled. I gripped the table as though it could anchor me to reality. That night, I double-checked every lock, every latch. Sleep refused me, my sheets damp with sweat, every sound outside magnified, the wind rattling the windows, the groan of the house settling, the distant bark of a dog. Just when I thought I might sink into a restless, exhausted doze, a knock came at the front door. Slow, deliberate, unannounced. I peered through the peephole and froze. Robert, my late wife's brother, the man whose shadow had haunted our family for years, stood there, smiling faintly, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Robert's presence meant one thing: this was bigger than Daniel alone. I opened the door and froze. There he was, Uncle Robert, standing on my porch, cologne sharp enough to make my head spin, his smile slick and predatory. My stomach sank as memories of old disputes clawed at me, the inheritance arguments, the nights he whispered venomous doubts to Emily, the way he always made me feel like I wasn't enough. Now he was here, and worse, he hadn't come alone. Daniel lingered behind him, leaning casually against the doorframe, his expression unreadable, yet that same cruel glint danced in his eyes. The two of them exchanged a glance that made my skin crawl. I felt like a ghost in my own home, an intruder in the space I'd always called mine. "Families should stick together," Robert said smoothly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His voice was oily, too practiced. "Isn't that right, Daniel?" Daniel's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. "Of course, Uncle. Family always comes first." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I wasn't expecting you, Robert." He chuckled lightly, the sound more like a hiss. "And yet here I am. It seems some things never change." He scanned the living room with predatory precision, his eyes lingering on small details, the freshly cleaned floors, the photograph of Emily on the mantel, the faint dirt under the rug from my earlier discoveries. "You've been busy," he said, almost mockingly. The air smelled of cologne and old wood, oppressive and suffocating. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight as he walked, each step measured, deliberate. My pulse hammered in my ears, each beat like a warning I couldn't ignore. Shadows stretched across the walls from the dim lamp overhead, twisting their faces into shapes I couldn't read but could feel. I noticed the subtleties, the twitch of Robert's fingers, the slight flex of his jaw, the way Daniel's eyes followed his uncle's every move, like a trained animal. I could feel their unspoken language, the tension pulsing between them. It was a silent conspiracy, and I was trapped in the middle. I wanted to retreat, to close the door and pretend they weren't here, but fear anchored me in place. Every instinct screamed that this was more than just a visit, that Daniel and Robert were orchestrating something I could barely comprehend. The buried bracelet, the letter, Daniel's cold smile, all pieces of a puzzle whose picture terrified me. I tried to steady my breath, forcing calm into my voice. "Can I get you some coffee? Or water?" Robert shook his head, his eyes never leaving mine. "No, thank you. I just wanted to reconnect. Family, after all." He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was thin, controlled, sinister. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We've been thinking a lot about the family legacy. You know, keeping things in the right hands." "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat tight. "What are you talking about?" Robert leaned in slightly, just enough to make his cologne hit me like a wave. "Everything. Your position, your influence. Some things need guidance, and guidance is best coming from the right people." I flinched at his words. I knew exactly what he meant: control. They wanted me sidelined, pushed out, removed. And Daniel, my own son, was the perfect instrument. The room felt smaller, walls pressing in. The tick of the clock on the wall became deafening. Outside, a light wind rattled the window panes, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. The air was thick, heavy with intent. Every glance they exchanged felt like a threat, every pause a countdown. That night, I lay awake in the dark, listening. Footsteps on the floor, soft whispers. I crept toward the slightly ajar door of the living room and froze. There they were, Daniel and Robert, voices low but urgent. "The day of the funeral," Robert whispered. "Everything has to be ready," Daniel replied, the cold precision in his voice making my stomach turn. I pressed my face against the wall, heart hammering. They were planning something final. And it was my life, my family, and my home that hung in the balance. They were planning a funeral, for a man still breathing. I pressed my ear against the wall, the floorboards cold beneath my hand. Whispers carried through the thin partition, Robert's voice oily, Daniel's low and measured. "The funeral is set," Robert said. "Everyone will believe it." My stomach lurched. A funeral. For me. The thought wasn't abstract. It was a plan, meticulously plotted. Every word they spoke was a step toward my erasure. My pulse thudded violently, my chest tight. The room spun slightly, and I gripped the wall for balance. My hands shook, nails digging into my palms, leaving crescent-shaped indentations. They weren't preparing to mourn me. They were preparing to remove me from the world entirely. "Robert, by the time anyone realizes it, everything will be in place. Obituary arrangements, all set. No one will suspect." "Daniel, it's better this way. You know they'd resist if we tried anything halfway. We need it clean, precise." "Robert, exactly. And you? Ready for your part?" "Daniel, everything is ready. It's only a matter of time. Their time. Their carefully controlled schedule." I could almost taste the malice, thick and metallic, in the air. Every plan they whispered was a dagger aimed at my life, and the weight of inevitability threatened to crush me. I wanted to scream, to charge into the living room and confront them, but fear kept me rooted. And then, something sparked. Rage. Cold, deliberate, consuming rage. If they wanted me dead, they underestimated me. I wasn't going to be a pawn in their cruel theater. Not Daniel. Not Robert. Not anyone. I thought back to the bracelet, the letter, the cold smile on Daniel's face. The signs had been there all along. But now I saw the bigger picture. This was no random betrayal. This was orchestration, conspiracy, and every detail mattered. Every step they took, I had to counter. The air in my bedroom felt thick, heavy with tension. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen became a constant metronome to my panic. Shadows stretched across the walls, warped by the dim streetlight filtering through the curtains, creating ghostly shapes that seemed to lean in, listening with me. My skin crawled, the hairs on my neck standing on end as if warning me that even the walls had ears. Could I ensure their meticulous plan would implode at the moment it mattered most? Every option carried risk, every misstep could be fatal. But sitting idle, waiting for them to decide my fate, was no longer an option. I thought of their glances, Robert's condescending smirk, Daniel's cold, unreadable eyes. Their overconfidence would be their downfall. They assumed I was paralyzed by fear, that I would comply, that I would die quietly. They underestimated the one thing they never could control, me. "Fine," I whispered to myself, voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "If this is a game, then I'll play it better. They want a funeral? I'll give them one, but not for me." The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth as I paced the room, plotting. The faint creak of the floor beneath my feet became a rhythm to measure my thoughts. My hands were still trembling, but determination replaced panic, the chill in my bones turning into fire. Outside, the wind rattled the window, carrying a hint of wet leaves and earth, the same smell from the backyard, the same place where secrets and lies had already begun to surface. That night, I sat at my desk, folding my own plan into existence. If they wanted to erase me, I'd make sure their entire plot unraveled. Every whispered word, every secret glance. They didn't know I'd been listening, and they didn't know I had already started turning their own precision against them. Tomorrow I'd begin. Tomorrow, their funeral would be for someone else entirely. They plotted my death, I plotted their downfall. The old tape recorder felt heavy in my hands, like a relic and a weapon all at once. When I clicked it on, the tiny red light glowed, and the faint smell of burning dust from the attic mixed with the plastic, an odd comfort. It smelled like my father's workshop, like nights I'd stayed up fixing things while the house slept. Tonight, that smell made me steady. I started with the phone calls. I replayed Daniel's late-night whispers, Robert's oily laughter. I set the recorder beside the rotary phone and dialed my own number, letting it ring until the messages filled the tape. Daniel's clipped. "Everything's ready," Robert's low voice saying. "We'll make it clean." I sat cross-legged on the floor, listening to their voices become evidence. Each playback made my hands less shaky. "Play that again," I told the empty room, and the recorder obliged, cold, clinical, undeniable. I pulled out a shoebox of old files, bank statements, insurance forms, Emily's funeral receipts. The paper had a dry, papery smell, the rustle of pages a small, furious comfort. I'd never been careful with money records. I trusted the wrong people. Now I scanned every line for transfers, for odd withdrawals, for the signature that wasn't mine. My fingers found things I hadn't expected. A small wire to a shell company with Robert's name tucked in the middle, an unsigned contract with Daniel listed as authorized. The numbers were sloppy, almost ashamed to be hidden. They thought they were invisible. I taped photos next to statements. Daniel at the backyard, shovel in hand. Robert's car outside the funeral home, the bracelet half buried in the dirt. I labeled everything in my shaky handwriting, date, place, witness. Seeing it all arranged made the plan stop being abstract and start being real. Each piece clicked into place like the teeth of a lock. I practiced questions aloud. "Why did you write my obituary?" I whispered, mimicking Daniel's voice. I listened for the tremor, for the forced smile in his tone, those tiny tells that always gave people away. Daniel had a habit of tapping his fingers when he lied. Robert licked his lips when he felt cornered. I'd watched those tells for years. Now they were my map. At night, I waited until the house held its breath. The clock's tick turned loud. I learned the patterns. When Daniel left the house, when Robert called from a number that always went to voicemail, when they met at the corner cafe. I followed small rhythms, trash pickup days, church bell chimes, and used them to time my own moves. I made copies. Old receipts went into envelopes. I wrote summaries on sticky notes and plastered them on the fridge. Transfer, July 12th, $5,000. Robert bracelet, found backyard, June 3rd. The kitchen flooded with evidence like a second light. Sometimes Daniel would pass the kitchen and glance at the notes, his jaw tightening, the tiny flare of nostrils I had learned to read. He'd look away fast, then move on. Those quick looks were cracks in their armor. I recorded visuals too. My phone became my silent witness. I filmed Daniel pacing, nails picking at the corner of a photograph, his forced smiles as he spoke to me about family. I filmed Robert at the cemetery, his hand lingering on Emily's headstone longer than a polite visit. The angle caught the way his lips twitched when he thought no one watched. The footage was messy, shaky, grainy, but the truth never needs polish. At times I almost broke. The air would thicken, and my chest would flood with the old grief. Emily's laugh, her smell, the way she folded towels just so. I'd close my eyes, and for a second I was a man who wanted to forgive, to fix, to go back. But then the recorder would blink its red light, and the cold, soft sound of their plotting would pull me back. Forgiveness would be a luxury that could kill me. "Are you really going to do this?" I asked the recorder once, a foolish, bitter joke to keep myself honest. The tape only breathed back static. I went to the police, careful, measured. I didn't hand over everything. The officer took my notes politely, his pen like a judge's gavel. I watched their faces, the tiny micro-expressions that showed disbelief or boredom. They suggested counseling, a restraining order, ways to mediate family disputes. I tucked those suggestions into a drawer. I needed more than sympathy. I needed proof they couldn't argue with, so I forged forward. I switched off lights, staged calls, and set up a meeting with Robert under the pretense of discussing family business. I planted a camera behind a potted plant in the living room, its lens hiding like an eye. I slipped a USB into my pocket that afternoon, filled with every file I'd digitized, a neat little package of truths. The plan required timing, patience, and lies of my own. They underestimated patience. They thought fear would keep me small. They assumed my age and grief made me easy to push aside. They were wrong. The night before their funeral, I moved the last piece. I remember the weight of the thing in my hands, the envelope they'd planned to pass to the funeral home, the document with my name in the headline, the final touch to make the world believe I was gone. I lifted it, felt its thin paper, the official stamp they had faked. My palm was steady, my breath was measured. I switched it. I took their final piece, smooth, crisp with cruelty, and replaced it with my own. Not the obituary, not the death certificate. My copy contained the truth, recordings, transfers, photos, confessions edited to play at exactly the right second. It was a trap made of paper and pixels, ready to snap. I slid the envelope where they would find it, where it would be used to complete their theater. I left no fingerprints. I left a little note only they would understand, an echo of Robert's own phrase tucked in a corner. Allure. The house seemed quieter after. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, the night smelled of wet earth and the faint, familiar tang of burning dust. I turned off the attic lamp and sat in the dark, the recorder whispering faintly beside me. Tomorrow they would think they'd finished me. Tomorrow they would learn the script had changed. I attended my own funeral, alive. The church smelled of lilies and candle wax, an intoxicating sweetness that made my stomach twist. Sunlight streaked through the stained glass, scattering color across polished wooden floors. Every creak of the aisle beneath my shoes echoed like a countdown. Rows of chairs brimmed with relatives and neighbors, each face a mix of sorrow and curiosity, all waiting to mourn me, or so they thought. I crouched behind a pillar near the entrance, heart hammering. My hand clutched the recorder, the letters, the files, everything I'd spent nights gathering. I could hear Robert's low, rehearsed voice whispering through the microphone. He smiled at Daniel, who nodded stiffly beside him, both wearing masks of solemnity that barely hid their anticipation. They thought they controlled the day. They had no idea I held the strings now. I breathed slowly, tasting the waxy air. Every fiber of my body screamed tension. The piano played softly, the notes trembling like the lie I was about to unravel. I peeked around the pillar, scanning their expressions. Robert's forced smile twitched at the edges. Daniel's jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to snap. Small tells, micro-expressions, they'd never learn I'd been watching. Then the minister began to read my obituary. My chest tightened, throat dry. The words were hollow, distant, yet deafening in their certainty. He was beloved, a kind soul. Each phrase a dagger intended to convince the room that I was gone. The camera they'd planted to film the service for insurance purposes sat like a silent witness, but now, it would record something else entirely. I rose from behind the pillar. The aisle seemed to stretch for miles. My shoes whispered against the wooden floor. Gasps erupted, voices rising in shocked murmurs. I walked slowly, deliberately, holding up the tape recorder and envelopes like sacred weapons. Their rehearsed smiles faltered as eyes widened, disbelief spreading through the crowd. "This is the funeral you planned," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "But it's yours now." Robert's lips parted. A forced word caught in his throat. His cologne, a sharp, suffocating scent, filled the space between us, almost choking. I could see his knuckles whitening, veins popping on his forehead. Daniel's body went rigid, his eyes darting between the letters, the recorder, and me. I pressed play on the recorder. Robert's voice, oily and confident just hours ago, now trembled in unmistakable guilt. Daniel's whispered confessions, the casual plotting, the moment they'd decided my life didn't matter, they echoed through the church with cinematic clarity. Each word drew a reaction, whispers, stifled cries, and stunned silence. The air thickened like fog, everyone leaning in, forced to witness the truth. I moved down the aisle, laying out documents on the pulpit, bank transfers, photos, letters, even the fake death certificate they'd planned to present. Faces paled. The piano's soft notes now felt ominous, like a countdown to the reckoning I'd orchestrated. "Every lie," I said, pacing slowly, "every plan to erase me, is now evidence against you. Not just in this room, but for anyone who cared enough to look." Robert's smile cracked, a tremor running down his spine. He tried to speak, to assert control, but words failed him. Daniel sank to his knees, covering his face, screaming, "He wasn't supposed to survive!" The sound split the silence like glass. Murmurs rippled through the church, disbelief and fear mixing in equal measure. I glanced at the room, soaking in the faces of those who had blindly mourned a man still alive. Shock, fear, rage, triumph. I let them feel it. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. I had turned their fear of me into my weapon. "You wanted a death," I said, voice rising, echoing off the high ceilings. "You wanted control. You wanted to write my ending. But today, the story changes." Robert's face flushed deep red, eyes darting, lips trembling. Daniel wept openly, the harsh lines of his face collapsing into raw panic. I raised the recorder, playing the final proof, a snippet of Robert planning the fake funeral, Daniel agreeing, laughing softly at the idea of my disappearance. Every detail, every confession, undeniable. The crowd leaned forward, caught between horror and fascination. I stepped onto the platform, spreading the letters and files like a fan of revelations. The smell of paper mingled with the candle wax. The sunlight through the stained glass now cast fractured rainbows across their guilt-ridden faces. "This is the end of your performance," I said softly, almost whispering, "and the start of accountability." Robert opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His control had crumbled. Daniel's body shook with regret and fear. I let the moment stretch, each second a drumbeat of justice. The piano fell silent. My pulse slowed just enough to savor the victory. Every plan, every careful step, had led here, alive, unbroken, untouchable. And yet, as I looked at their faces, I knew the game wasn't over. I had won the day, but the story had one last twist left. Robert's face turned red with rage as Daniel broke down, screaming. He wasn't supposed to survive! Justice came, but it didn't feel like victory. The church, once thick with the scent of lilies and candle wax, now reeked of tension and fear. Gasps and murmurs ricocheted off the high ceilings as the crowd turned on them. Faces twisted with shock and betrayal. Shouts pierced the air. "How could you? I can't believe this! They planned it all!" Each accusation landed like a hammer against their carefully constructed facade. I stood at the front, shaking, my hands still trembling from adrenaline. My mind raced, reliving every detail. The recordings, the letters, the faked funeral, the whispered plans overheard through walls. This was the culmination of nights spent in fear, hours spent strategizing, moments where I questioned whether survival alone was enough. Robert's smile, once oily and self-assured, faltered. He opened his mouth to spin his lies, but the words stumbled out, clumsy and weak. His eyes darted to the documents spread across the pulpit, then to the recorder in my hand, then back at the crowd whose attention had turned from polite mourning to raw outrage. Daniel collapsed beside him, shaking uncontrollably, sobs racking his body. I didn't," he stammered, but shame and fear drowned his voice. The energy he had wielded to manipulate and intimidate evaporated instantly, leaving him small, broken, and human. I caught a glimpse of Robert's fingers clenching, nails digging into his palms like he wanted to strike, but the weight of accountability pinned him down. His eyes, cold and venomous, met mine. A silent promise lingered there, a threat that even behind bars, he would never forgive. My stomach tightened at the sight, a shiver running down my spine. And then, as if on cue, sirens wailed outside. The doors burst open. Officers I tipped off in advance strode in, badges glinting in the muted sunlight. They moved with precision, leading Robert and Daniel toward handcuffs and the waiting squad cars. Robert protested, his voice shaking, trying to sound commanding, but no one listened. Daniel's defiance had already crumbled into despair. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Silence replaced chaos. Even the stained glass felt dimmer, the colorful sunlight now muted. My knees shook not from fear, but from the weight of everything I had endured. The betrayal, the sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety, everything that had threatened to crush me. And yet, amidst it all, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a measure of freedom. The crowd began to murmur softly, processing what had just unfolded. Neighbors, friends, even distant relatives stared, some with pity, some with admiration, some with quiet relief. I kept my gaze forward, refusing to let the mix of emotions distract me. I had orchestrated every step, survived every trap, and now watched the culmination of my efforts. But as Robert was led past me, his eyes found mine once more. Venom, hatred, a promise of unfinished business. My heart skipped a beat, the old adrenaline flaring like a warning. Justice had come, but the shadow of his malice reminded me it would never truly be over. I exhaled slowly, savoring the moment, letting the tremors fade just slightly. The world outside the church awaited, and I knew that my life, though scarred, would continue, wiser, stronger, more cautious. Weeks later, I received a final letter, from Robert's prison cell. The story didn't end with their arrest, it ended with his final threat. The envelope arrived on a damp Thursday morning. Its edges were frayed, the paper faintly smelling of tobacco and old ink. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the weight of the moment pressing down like a vice. I recognized the scrawl immediately, Robert's handwriting, sharp, angular, and deliberately uneven, as if every stroke carried menace. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire and forget the darkness he had tried to drag me into. But another part, a stubborn, vengeful part, needed to read it. I slid my fingernail under the flap, the crinkle of paper echoing like a gunshot in the stillness of my empty house. You may think you won, but graves can be dug deeper. You'll never escape me. The words stabbed like knives. My stomach churned, adrenaline snapping into every nerve. Even behind bars, even through the cold concrete and steel, Robert's shadow reached me. I could almost hear his voice, low and insidious, whispering the threats I had feared for months. My hands shook so violently the paper bent and tore slightly at the crease. I sank into the armchair near the window, the smell of damp earth from last night's rain still clinging to the yard outside, blending with the faint scent of tobacco in the letter. Daniel had never written me again. Maybe that was its own punishment, the silence of someone who had been just as culpable, now powerless and mute. But Robert's presence was alive in those words, curling into my chest, making the walls of my house feel suddenly too small. I read the letter again, more slowly this time, tracing each word with my finger as if by touching it I could somehow erase it. But the menace remained. Graves can be dug deeper. Every memory I had tried to bury, every sleepless night, every panic-filled moment, rose like ghosts to sit beside me. I realized then that surviving them hadn't ended the story. It had just opened a new chapter, one I wasn't sure I could close. The silence of the house pressed in on me. No clock ticked, no birds chirped, just the faint rustle of the letter in my hand, the subtle hum of the heater, the air heavy with dread. I could almost imagine footsteps in the hallway, the scrape of metal, the whisper of a voice I knew all too well. The thought made my pulse spike. I remembered the night of the funeral, the way Robert's eyes had burned with rage, Daniel's collapse beside him, the taste of justice sweet but incomplete. I had felt freedom then, a fleeting, fragile thing. But this letter reminded me that freedom was never absolute when a predator survived, even behind bars. I tried to focus on the ordinary, the cups drying on the rack, the gentle sway of the curtains in the wind, but Robert's words clung to every surface, every shadow. You'll never escape me. The paper crinkled again as I balled it in my hands, the sound loud in the oppressive silence, and I realized that part of me, the part that had fought, survived, and struck back, now had to live with perpetual caution. I set the letter down on the table, staring at it through the gray morning light. Every instinct screamed to burn it, to flush it away, but the need to remember, to anticipate, to be vigilant, anchored it there. Even alive, I was altered, fractured in ways invisible to the world. The taste of safety had dulled, replaced by the metallic tang of anticipation. And every night since, I sleep with the lights on, waiting for the sound of footsteps that may never come.